One is on? All right.
I can't tell you.
Okay, well, I was right and Ruth was right, so I only get half credit. Oh well. Once again, she was right. You know, it's just, like I say, it's so rare that she's wrong that I just like to glory whenever she is, but I can't this morning. Let's turn to the book of Malachi, or Malachi. I don't know how the Hebrews pronounced it. I'm told that they put the emphasis on the last syllable usually. But I'm just going to say Malachi because that's how I've always said it. And it has to be right if I've always done it that way, correct? You know, the book of Malachi, the word or the name Malachi may have originally been Malachiah or Malachiah, however. The word Malachi means my messenger, as translated from Hebrew. Malachiah or Malachiah means messenger of Yahweh or Jehovah. So, you know, what was it? Well, in Latin, it's I've forgotten. Maliki in Latin. The Septuagint translates it Malachias, by the hand of his messenger. So, you know, we've got various little nuances of difference in the title there, but it's all, what is this? It's the message of God to His people, the children of Israel. What was the time of the writing of the book of Malachi? And let me just say, to start with, the outline that you have been handed, the front page here is the one that we're going to be going over today to some extent, and I'm going to jump off from this. And then the second page is next Sunday's outline, and it has some questions on it for you. So I'm going to desperately try to stay a week ahead with my outlines, and we're going to take this, since we have 4 weeks to cover this, we're going to take this in the 4 lessons, and today is going to be the introduction to the book, and then the chapters we're going to divide up, chapters 1, chapter 2, all the way down to the last verse of chapter 2. We're going to take the last verse of chapter 2 with chapters 3 and 4. Because chapter 4 in the Hebrew Bible is actually incorporated into chapter 3. It's really the same point. The last verse of chapter 2 really begins chapter 3. A committee of men divided the Bible into chapters. And you know how messed up committees can get things. So there are some differences. I do find a lot more problems, though, with the verse divisions of the Bible, because one man made those verse divisions riding cross-country in a chariot. At least a committee of men took a little consideration to divide the Bible into chapters. So there was a little more thought in that than there was in the verse division. But that's neither here nor there, really. Let's as we're studying a book, let's try to get out of our mind these chapter and verse divisions, is my point, because God didn't put them there. Men put them there. Uninspired men put them there. Of course, I guess King James, you know, he was inspired, or at least he thought he was. So let's move on. The writing of the book of Malachi. Some people think that the book of Malachi was probably written during the time of Jeremiah. I tend to take the early date for the writing of most of the books of the Bible rather than the later date that many scholars take. This is one of those cases where I'm going to become a heretic and break from tradition, and I believe it was probably the later date, probably in the time of Nehemiah. And it may have very well have been the very last of the Old Testament prophets to have spoken. And the reasons for this, as put in your outline, there's no mention of idolatry in this book. Israel had a big problem with worshiping idols all the way up to the time that God brought Babylon in and took Judah out. When He completely destroyed the people, And then after 70 years, he said, you have not given my land their Sabbaths properly. Every seventh year, the Israelites were to give the land a Sabbath's rest. God said, you have not done that. For 70 Sabbaths, you have ignored my yearly Sabbath law. Therefore, I am going to give the land 70 years of Sabbath. And then I'll bring you back. When Israel came back from that captivity under Ezra and Nehemiah and so forth, Israel no longer had a problem with idolatry. From that point on, they finally got the message. God does not want us to worship idols. You know, kind of like many of you are old enough to remember the days when your parents actually disciplined you. My father used a belt. Many fathers used a razor strop. And my dad would warn us, and I'm going to get my belt. I'm going to take off my belt. I'm going to take off my belt. Finally, it hit a point where Daddy started pulling his belt off. Well, we decided usually at that point we were ready to listen. Too late, because we got the belt anyway. God brought Israel to that point, and He said, finally, I'm taking off my belt now. I'm going to take you out. You're done for. For 70 years, I'm going to have the land the way I want it to be. And when you come back, you better learn the lesson. And they did. But it was a little too late for them. At this time, the people are in a state of complete indifference toward God. And that was not quite the case in the time of... They just didn't believe in God, for the most part, in the time of Jeremiah and at the time that Babylon came in. They were worshiping their idols to a large extent. And just, God was one of the idols that they worshiped, basically, at that point. And that's a minor nuance. You can quibble with that. If you want to quibble with that, you can. Their worship had deteriorated at this point to just a going through the motions state. And we see from some of the outside sources that at the time that the 400 years of silence began, that's how their worship had become. He mentions a governor in chapter 1 and verse 8, and up until really the last few days before Babylon came in, they had a king. He was a puppet king at the end, but they did have a king. And so here he mentions a governor. He talks about the people intermarrying with foreigners. And we know that when Ezra and Nehemiah brought the people back, he made them put away their foreign wives, but then they went right back into the marrying of foreign women after that. And then God in chapter 3 and verse 1, He tells them that He is going to withhold His blessings from them until He sends His messenger, who he's talking about is John the Baptist. And here He makes the promise of John the Baptist. So it's kind of if you want to argue with the date of the book and say it was earlier, I'm going to give it to you. I just tend to think it was probably the later date and right before the time of the 400 years of silence. I just think that fits a little better with the message that's put in this book. Nonetheless, the principles of this book that apply to us are the same today as they were when Babylon overtook them. They're the same today as when Israel crossed the Red Sea. They're the same as when this later date that I've given to the book. The theme of Malachi. I think there are probably two themes in this book, and one is I, Jehovah, change not, chapter 3 and verse 6. And then in chapter 4 and verse 4, remember the law of Moses. It seems to me that the whole book hinges around those two major points, and everything else is broken out from that. In the content of the book, and this is by no means exhaustive of the content, we'll exhaust it a little more as we go through it, but there are 9 statements of the people. The book is written kind of in a didactic style, did I use that word correctly? Where they have a dialogue going between God and the people. God speaks and the people speak, and God speaks and the people speak. God says, here's what you've done, and the people go, well, how have we done that? What are you talking about, God? How have we profaned your altar? Give us a break. We're doing all we can. And you hear that today, don't you? I'm worshiping God the best I know how. What does He want from me? And this is what the people said. And there are 9 of these sayings, yet you say, or but you said statements. And they're not all start with yet you say or but you said, but that's the way I've categorized them. In chapter 1 and verse 2, the people said, well, in what way have you loved us? God said, I've loved you. Well, in what way have you loved us? In chapter 1 and verse 6, they said, in what way have we despised your name, Jehovah? Come on, God. What way have we despised your name? In verse 7 of chapter 1, well, in what way have we defiled your name? We haven't done any of that. The people are arrogant, is the point being made here. Chapter 1 and verse 13, oh, what a weariness it is to serve God. Well, if we just have to, we'll go to church. Have you heard that today? Chapter 2 and verse 14, well, for what reason? Why are you condemning us here, God? What's your reason in condemning us? In the time of the New Testament, what did the Pharisees say? Well, we're the seed of Abraham. What are you talking about? We've never been in bondage to any man. Just the arrogance of them. In what way have we wearied him? Verse 17 of chapter 2. God, why are you weary with us? We haven't done anything to you. And basically that was his complaint. They hadn't done anything for him or to him. Or in chapter 3 and verse 7, well, how shall we return? We've never left you, God. You hear that today. Chapter 3 and verse 8, in what way have we robbed you? This worship that we do, God feels so wonderful to us and it's so fulfilling to us. In what way have we robbed you? We like it. Kind of like some of my customers in my business, I'll give you all kinds of business. Yeah, but you don't pay your bills. I can't afford to keep on doing your work if you don't pay me for doing your work. And that's kind of the same principle that God's talking to them about here, They're going, well, we're giving you what you deserve, God. No. In the New Testament, He fleshes that out more for us when we're told that even if we lived an absolutely sinlessly perfect life, we're still unprofitable servants. We can never give God what He deserves because we're unprofitable servants. If we served Him perfectly, all we've done is what we should have done. In chapter 3 and verse 13, what have we spoken against you, God? We've never said a word against you. And we're going to see the answers that God gives to those 9 questions that the people ask. Why should we study the book of Malachi? I want to go back and look in the rest of our time today at the history of the earth, because I think it answers that question very well. Going all the way back to Cain and Abel. Cain brought an offering to God and he offered it. And many people will say, well, the problem with Cain's offering was that it was of the fruit of the ground. Abel brought an offering of the God of the firstlings of the flock. Now, I've always maintained that firstlings is the key word. Many people disagree with me. That's fine if you agree or disagree with me. The point really is the same. Abel showed respect for God by offering his offering, as Hebrews 11 says, in faith to God. Cain, on the other hand, did what he had to do. And God didn't respect Cain's offering. And so God comes to Cain and He says, Cain, what's your problem? Well, Cain starts making excuses. And God says, look, sin is crouching at the door for you. Now I think, and this is my own personal opinion, and I'm not going to be dogmatic on this, I think at that point Cain had not sinned. I don't think his offering was a sinful thing. It was just something God didn't respect. And I think that's what God is telling Cain at this point. You haven't sinned yet, Cain, but sin is crouching at the door. It's lying in wait for you. You can master it, or you can give in to it. Cain chose to give in to it and murdered his brother. Now he obviously sinned at that point. And then when God comes to Cain and he says, Cain, where's your brother Abel? Cain starts making excuses. Well, am I my brother's keeper? I don't know where he is. Good grief, God, you expect me to keep track of my brother? He says, his blood cries out to me from the ground, Cain. I saw what you did. And he says, for this you are going to be cast out from men, and you're going to wander the earth as a vagabond. And Cain immediately says, oh God, this is just too hard for me. I can't stand this. I murdered my brother, but I shouldn't have to face the consequences for that. God, that's not fair. See a correlation to Malachi? You know, God says, here is how you have defiled my altar. Here is how you have profaned me. Here are the things you've done wrong in Israel. Because, well, so what? Kind of the same attitude as Cain. Let's move on up to the time of Noah. The earth had become so wicked at the time of Noah that God said, I'm going to destroy man off the face of the earth completely. Now Peter tells us that in doing that, God was actually saving, He was not killing, He was saving Noah and his family from the sins of the world. Evil companionships corrupt good manners. And so by destroying the evil people off the earth, God was sparing Noah and his 3 sons and their wives from being sucked into the sins of the rest of the world. So this was actually, the waters of the flood were actually a saving act. In like manner whereunto baptism doth also now save you. But I can just imagine, here are the people, Noah's preaching to them 120 years. And he's hammering away on this ark. And he's preaching to them, you're in sin, you need to repent. God's going to destroy the earth. You better repent. And the people are laughing at him. What are you building that thing for? That big old boat in the middle of dry land. What good's that going to do you, Noah? There's no water anywhere around here. Now, I'm embellishing the story a little bit here because we're not told those details. We don't know if the ark was built nearby a body of water, if it was built up on a mountaintop. Doesn't tell us where Noah lived exactly and what the terrain was. But the people, they didn't have any respect for Noah. Didn't understand what he was doing. And according to the scriptural record, it apparently is such that it had never rained on the earth before the flood of Noah. We don't read any record of it. In the beginning, we see that a mist went up from the ground and watered the herbs and the ground around it. And so apparently there had been no rain. So here was something, Noah says, God's going to make it rain on the earth. Well, what's rain? We've never seen rain. I mean, you can understand that. I can understand that. But God can do the things that we've never seen before. And we better understand that. But I can just imagine that at that last moment when the rain starts falling and the people go, oh, what is this? And this torrential, it must have been a torrential downpour. To have flooded the entire earth in 40 days, it had to be a torrential downpour. I can't imagine it was just a light sprinkle. And it probably was such a downpour that the people couldn't move about very much. But I can imagine that they were trying to get to that ark. And I can just envision in my mind some of them trying to make ladders to climb up the side when the door was shut and they couldn't get it open, trying to climb up the side and get on top of it so that they could get out of the waters as the flood waters started to rise around that boat. Now here again, I'm embellishing the story. We're not told those details. But it was too late. God brought His judgment upon the earth and He wiped out every living creature on the earth, except for Noah and his family. And the animals, the 7 of each clean animal, and the 2 by 2 that we often hear about in the songs and the stories and all of that are the unclean animals. It was 7 of the clean, 2 of the unclean. Sound anything like Malachi? And what Malachi was facing when he gave his prophecy of this day? Yeah, it does. Then we move on down to Israel. And I'm hitting the high points here of the history. There are a lot of other details that we could flesh out that show this same point over and over happening. And that is that Israel comes to a point where God brings them out of the land of Egypt. He brings them to Mount Sinai. He gives them the codified law, which man had never had before. What's a codified law, God? I don't know. It's always been delivered by the patriarchs. But see, here again, God can do what man's never seen before. And man needs to accept what God does because God knows better than we do. And He delivers these commandments engraved in stone, and Moses brings them down from the mountain. And the first set He breaks because Moses is angry when he sees the sins of the people and sees them bowing down to this golden calf and rising up to play, as the Scripture says, and that means commit fornication. And God brings them through that, and He punishes them for it, and He brings them all the way around up to the land of Israel. And He says, now it's time to go in. Before you go in, I want you to pick out 12 spies, 1 man from each of the 12 tribes. Send them into the land. And then have them come back and tell the people how wonderful the land is. We know what happened there. 10 of those spies came back and they said, oh, the land is everything God said it was. But there's giants in the land. We can't defeat these giants. And 2 of the spies, the faithful remnant, which God has only ever had as a faithful remnant, all the way back to Cain and Abel, He's only had a faithful remnant. Days of Noah, just a faithful remnant. And now 2 of the spies say, you know what? These giants are nothing compared to God. God is going to defeat them for us, folks. We need to go in and take the land. And the people go, oh no. We can't take the land. There's giants in the land. No matter how good it is. Moses, you've led us out here to be killed. The land is everything God told us it was going to be, but, giants. We got a little glitch. And I'm reminded of the story of Naaman. You know, Naaman was told to dip 7 times in the Jordan River. He dipped 6 times. Leprosy was still there. Didn't look so good for God's plan at that point, did it? Is God's plan going to work? Well, he dipped the 7th time, and guess what? He came up and his skin was just as clean as that of a newborn babe. Leprosy was gone. God's plan works when we work His plan. But see, Israel didn't understand that. And because there was one little hitch that they saw as a hitch, giants, they said, oh, we can't take the land. And God said, well, you made your decision. Now you're going to wander in the wilderness for 40 years until every one of you that's 20 years old and above dies, except for Joshua and Caleb. They're the only 2 that are 20 years old and above that are going to enter the land of Canaan. You know, I've often wondered if God at that point understood that Moses, who was above 20 years old, was not going to enter the land of Canaan. Because he said everybody but Joshua and Caleb. Now, oftentimes we exempt Moses from that, but Moses didn't go in. He made that little mistake there at the very end, and God didn't let him go into the land of Canaan. And I just wonder if God knew what was going to happen. That's God's end of the stick, and I'm not going to get into that. So then the people, here again, God says, now I'm taking off my belt, as my dad would say. And the people are ready. We're going to do what God said to do. We're going to do God's plan. We're going to follow it. God said, no, you're not now. It's too late. But they tried to go into the land, and what happened? They were defeated. And they were driven out, and many of them were killed. And now they got to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. They enter the land of Canaan. Finally, after 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, God teaches them, you're going to go in, but you're going to go in and you're going to take it my way, not your way. They learned their lesson, finally. And they crossed the Jordan on dry ground. Kind of reminds me of the Red Sea, doesn't it? And they go into the land of Canaan, and they go up to Jericho, and they take Jericho without any trouble at all. It was a walled city. Now, they didn't have airplanes. Walled cities now are the worst possible military tactic. In World War II, the French thought their Maginot Line was going to hold the Germans back. But when the tank was developed and when the airplane was developed, the fixed fortifications were obsolete. And that Maginot Line was a bunch of fixed fortifications that the French thought, we can beat the Germans back from here. The Germans just came in and bombed them, brought their tanks in and all of this, and just blew them to smithereens and went right on through it. But in that day, the walled city was a mighty powerful thing. And Israel came in, and they looked at it, and they said, okay, God, what do we do? And God said, you march around it for 7 days, and on the 7th day, you march around it 7 times, and you blow your horns, and you shout with a loud shout. What's that going to do to the wall, God? For 6 days, they marched around the city, and nothing happened. The 7th day, they marched around 7 times. Nothing happened. Not looking so good for God's plan at this point, is it? We've done almost everything God told us to do, but it's not looking so good for God's plan. Nothing's happening. But then when they shouted with a loud shout and they followed God's command to the letter, I'm embellishing. They didn't see it that way, by the way, because they did everything God commanded them. And I'm just looking at it from probably the inhabitants of Jericho's viewpoint. What are these idiots doing? But when they shouted with a loud shout, walls fell flat. And they just walked in and they took everything. Not a single loss of Israelite life. And it's amazing to me that when the walls fell flat, the harlot Rahab had brought all of her family into her house, which was on the wall. That part of the wall didn't fall flat. She was saved alive with her entire family. And not only was she saved alive, but it's interesting to me to note that in the lineage of Jesus Christ, there's a harlot mentioned named Rahab. But then the next city they went to was Ai. No problem. That's a pushover city. If we took Jericho this easy, we can just walk in there and just the walls of Ai are going to fall down. And so they walked in and they went up to Ai, and I think it was 36 Israelites died because they didn't ask God how to do it. Well, we go on through the period of the Judges, and we go through this cycle over and over again. The Israelites begin to sin. And God tells them, look, don't keep doing this. But a couple of generations after Joshua and the elders that lived with Joshua died, Israel fell away from God. And so God had to bring in an oppressor nation. And they got the message. And they came back. Until finally they got to a point where in Samuel's time they said, we want a king. God said, you know, Samuel, you tell them. And if you read what God told Samuel to tell them about what the king was going to do to them, it was exactly the same thing that Moses told them when he first gave them the law. Moses told them, one of these days you're going to demand a king, and it'll be the biggest mistake you ever made. Up to that point, at least. And so when Samuel tells them essentially what the king's going to do to him is the same thing Moses told him the king was going to do to him. And it happened to him. Just like God told him, you don't really want a king because I'm your king. But they didn't want to accept that. And now we come down through this cycle again where God tells them then at the end in Jeremiah's time, I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to, just as I brought the Assyrians in to destroy the northern nation of Israel, I'm going to bring the Babylonians in and I'm going to destroy the nation of Judah. And you'd think they would have gotten the message. But now here we come right back to the same cycle again. The people are not listening to God. But the interesting thing to me here in the book of Malachi is that the people believe in God. They're not serving idols. Now they've married foreign women who serve idols. But they themselves, there's no indication here that they themselves are serving those idols. But at this point God comes in and He says, I'm going to take myself away from you. I'm going to do the worst possible thing I can do to you. I'm going to take myself away from you. I'm not going to let you worship me. I'm going to give you a famine of hearing my word until my messenger, John the Baptist, comes in, and then I'll start speaking to you again. And at that point, the people were going, I don't care. Even when God did to them what He told them He was going to do to them, they said, I don't care. They had gone so far into sin at this point in time that they just didn't care anymore. It's like me when my dad starts taking off the belt, I just bend over and go ahead, Dad. Let me have it. I don't care. Not going to affect me at all. And you know, I've seen some children at that point. Because they're just too far gone. And their parents begin to try to discipline them, and I don't know, I haven't listened to the news reports, and so I don't really know what happened in Connecticut, but I just have an imagination. I have an imagination that probably, it seems from what I have heard, this young man wanted to kill his mother. And in doing so, he wanted to kill her, but he didn't want to just kill her. He wanted to hurt her in the worst way he possibly could. And that seems, from the little bit that I've heard, to be why he killed so many other people and so many of her school children. He's just getting back at Mom. And I'm sure his mother loved him and wanted what was right for him. But he was just beyond the point where he cared anymore what she thought or how she loved him or how she felt about him. When we throw God out of the picture, that's the point we get to. That's the point that Israel is at in the book of Malachi. Go ahead, God, do whatever you want to. We just don't care anymore. We're going to do what we want to, no matter what you do to us. Take us out. Take your word away from us. Don't give us any more prophets. We don't want to listen to them anyway. Why should we pay attention to the book of Malachi? Well, I just started to talk about it just a second ago. What have we done in this nation? We've taken God out of our government, separation of church and state. Can't have the two together. We've taken God out of our schools. You know, the 10 Commandments are good rules of life, whether you're religious or not. I think probably even Adolf Hitler would have given lip service to the Ten Commandments. He wouldn't have very well kept them, but he would have given lip service to them. But no, we're not even going to give lip service to them. We're not going to teach them at all in school. We're going to take God completely out of school. And as a matter of fact, we're going to take God out of church. You know, there are churches in this nation that refuse to read from the Word of God, that refuse to give any credence to anything God has written. In Temple Terrace, Florida, on Morris Bridge Road, there's a Universalist church. I can't remember the exact name, but it's the Universalist Church. And there's a United Church of Christ on Fowler Avenue. They don't want to see this book inside their doors, because this is archaic and it doesn't matter. When we take God completely out of our society, we will very rapidly get to the point of the people in Malachi. That's why we need to study the book of Malachi. Thank you for your attention today.